Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra Esinam App, and welcome to the Marketplace. Coming up this afternoon, Ghana unlikely to raise $1.3 billion cocoa syndicated loan as investors withdraw. Also coming up, customs in crunch meeting with Trade Ministry over demurrage waivers as ICOMs fail to deliver prompt services. And later in the bulletin, charges on mobile money interoperability and other digital banking resumes today after expiration of waivers. My name is Sandra Esinam Apple. The Bank of Ghana has begun engaging some savings and loans companies over disbursement of liquidity support for the sector. The regulator at its last Monetary Policy Committee meeting announced it has instituted a financial package for the sector. However, disbursement is yet to begin months after the announcement, resulting in fears that the sector could be hit by some liquidity challenges. Aboagye-Wiafe is the Executive Secretary of the Association of Savings and Loans Companies.
The timing for the disbursements, we think that is to a larger extent dependent on the central bank. And so we can only request from the central bank and encourage them to speed up the process and also continue to engage the people and continue to show the commitment that we have seen. So it is our expectation that it will come sooner than later, because the more it drags, the more those institutions who have a liquidity challenge will be suffering the more.
Well, some would say that. I mean, I remember when the Bank of Ghana announced this, some would argue that it has taken quite a while. Has it got to do with your members not meeting the requirements in accessing this facility, or the regulators still want to do a lot of prudence and a lot of work before these disbursements are done, one would say?
I don't think it's from our members, and I think majority of it has to do with the central bank in-house processes and coming up with the required roadmap and the requirements. And so, because as I said, it was only just last Friday that some of our members were invited by the central bank. And so all this while they had submitted the application. And so if it took some time, then I believe that central bank was doing something in-house, which I am believing that the central bank will speed up the process of the appraisal and the process of the disbursement to support these institutions.
Let's come to the liquidity situation of the industry and your members. There was a recent Bank of Ghana report that talked about the fact that, you know, it looks like your sector has taken quite a hit as a result of this. What is the situation right now as you speak in terms of the liquidity situation of your members at a time when there is COVID and the argument is that everybody is withdrawing from these institutions? What is the situation right now in terms of among your members when it comes to your liquidity position?
I'm very happy you asked this issue, and the central bank actually mentioned that, okay, the COVID situation has hit the SDI sector more than the commercial banks. This is actually to buttress the point that we have always been saying. What is it? That it is our members, the SNLs, the microfinance institutions, who actually support the SMEs in Ghana. The people who live from hand to mouth, it is our members who serve them. And again, if you look at the balance sheet of the commercial banks, the balance sheet of commercial banks, maximum 40% goes into loan, the rest into investment and other things. But if you come to the SDI, the majority of our balance sheet is in loans. The average in our industry is around 60% is in loans. Some of the institutions every deposit they mobilize their shareholder funds and everything, as high as 90% is in loans.
The amount of money spent on consumption of petroleum products should witness some significant increase from this morning. This was after major oil marketing companies like Total, Gull, and Shell all increased prices at the pump by 4.5% per litre over the weekend. These firms are now selling a litre of diesel and petrol at 4 cedis 65 pesos. This would translate into 20 Ghana cedis 92 pesos a gallon. Let's go on to Zoom to speak to the Executive Director of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers, Duncan Amwan. Duncan, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining me.
Good afternoon, Sandra. Thanks for having me.
Any surprises? What do you make of the latest development?
It is not surprising, but it's also not welcoming. Indeed, if you recall at the peak of COVID, when prices had tumbled to even zero and negatives on the world markets, Ghana witnessed some reductions at our pumps. But those reductions were not commensurate with what we had seen on the international markets. Fast forward to first week in June, fuel prices get increased by about 8.5%. And then within the same month, June, you are seeing about 4.25% further increases. So within the month of June, you are seeing almost 13% increases. That is quite worrying. We would have expected that though there will be increases, they will be staggered or thrown at us piecemeal, as we saw with the reductions when we had to get those reductions. Unfortunately, it looks as though the numbers that we are witnessing at the pumps are quite astronomical. And then again, we also ask the importers what is contributing to these increases. One of the major reasons you get happens to do with the cedi's depreciation or instability. And we would continue asking, for how long are Ghanaians going to be surcharged for the cedi's poor performance?
Right, Duncan, can you hear me? Hello, Duncan. Looks like we're having some challenges with connection, but can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you, Sandra.
Right, go ahead, please.
So as I was saying, indeed, if you talk to importers, you get the firm understanding that the cedi is not doing too well. World market prices have gone up marginally, but the cedi is also contributing to these increases. For that, we think authorities should be concerned. Authorities should find a solution to this cedi's drag on fuel prices, because it cannot be sustained that anytime the cedi performs poorly, you and I would have to go and share and pay more at the pumps for that depreciation.
Yeah, Duncan, well said. Sorry to interrupt, but well said. We've had this conversation several times. As stakeholders, what have you done? What are you doing to ensure that the consumer is not going to bear all this cost anytime the cedi is not performing well? What is the way forward for you with regards to the cedi's performance and consumers having to bear the pain for the cedi's performance?
Indeed, we can only do as much by, of course, corresponding or having some communication with authorities. If you remember not long ago, the Bank of Ghana had embarked on a program of auctioning dollars to people who do imports. We are saying that they should factor in petroleum importers, give them quarterly dollar rates so that they can be able to project or forecast how much they would need in order to be able to bring in petroleum products. If you are still allowing them to go to the open market to source for dollars at commercial rates, then consumers will have to be charged commercial values or figures for petroleum products. So the BOG has a job to do here. They need to ensure that at least some rates that are predictable applies to petroleum imports, and importers can be able to pay whatever amounts they owe suppliers without the cedi's depreciation having a huge toll on these numbers. Once that is done, we can be able to safely delink or decouple the cedi's performance from our pump prices. It cannot be sustained that we all continue to pay anytime the cedi does poorly.
So having said that, do you think that it's about time that we review the taxes on petroleum prices?
indeed, the taxes. We've had that conversation again, even on your network, a number of times. When politicians want to get revenue, the quickest way they think about is the numbers. So if there's this 13 million liters consumed daily and I slap a tax of 10 pesos, they know how to project revenues. What they don't know is the kind of impact, negative impact, these collections or revenues, they call it, or taxes, have on the ordinary Ghanaian and the economy overall. We have said that in 2015, a tax was introduced called the Special Petroleum Tax. The understanding then was that fuel prices or crude prices had dropped on the international market to around 32.29. And we, as a petroleum exporting country, were also reeling under that kind of pressure because we had a certain projected revenue we needed to make. So in order for government to be able to get its revenue, it slotted in that special petroleum tax to get some revenue. The expectation would have been that once crude prices pick up on the international market beyond the 30s, these taxes would have been, taking off. Unfortunately, they become a permanent fixture on your pricing. And as we speak, the taxes that were introduced with sunset clauses, the taxes that were introduced with all the promises that they were going to be reviewed or taken out in a year or two, they are all stuck on your price build-up. So we need to also look at the taxes immediately. Other than that, the weeks ahead portends further trouble for Ghanaian petroleum consumers.
I'm grateful for your time, Executive Director of COPEC. Thanks so much for joining us as always. Moving on to other stories now. The National Board for Small-Scale Industries has assured that it will soon begin disbursement of government stimulus package despite initial challenges. According to the board, the delay was due to some technical challenges encountered with the registration process. The board is giving the assurance that it is extending the deadline after it has actually extended the deadline for application by 6 days. Aboagye-Wiafe is Executive Director of the National Board for Small-Scale Industries.
I mentioned that we were ready, and I think that over the past few weeks, we have been saying that we're working towards it. And yes, we have been working towards it. As I mentioned, as we were about to download, to move on to it, we realized some of these fraudulent activities that had to be rectified to avoid a backlash from that situation. And so that is what caused the delay and the backlog. With regards to disbursements, yes, as soon as possible. And all this process, as I mentioned, in terms of rectifying, in terms of ensuring that we have the right details of people. Because the situation we don't want is the backlash of, yes, we've received the information, we haven't verified MOMO numbers, we release the MOMO, and you call and say it was sent to the wrong person. And so as much as possible, there's actually a lot more checks than we had assumed in terms of the work because there were so many wrong MOMO numbers. The other challenge was people were in a rush to complete the application forms and put a lot of numbers. So when we moved it on to take a look at it, we realized that the numbers did not correspond with some of the names we had in the system. And that would have also caused another backlash if we had rushed through the process to do what it is that we were doing. As much as possible as well, we actually also waited to the last few weeks because as much as possible, we wanted to see as many more people who wanted to apply to come so there would be a fair process so we could see as much and then be able to make and take an informed decision based on the numbers. Assuming we had gone on the first week and given everybody and realized that there were a lot more or better applications that could come at the end of it. So to be more fair in the process, we had to wait a bit more to do that. As soon as possible, and I can guarantee that, the first leg of the disbursements, and in view of making sure that the right processes are put in place and to ensure that it gets to the right people, we're looking at a two-step system where the ADUM loans, which is the micro loans, would immediately start being transferred and sorted to the beneficiaries. Then from there, in terms of the larger loans that take a bit more assessment, we shall make those assessments as much as possible.
International banks that were supposed to finance upcoming $1.3 billion cocoa loan syndication for 2020-2021 crop season have backed out of the process. These lenders, according to Reuters news agency, have cited the uncertainty amid the coronavirus as reason for their decision. Charles Aite has the rest of the story.
The decision by international lenders is in sharp contrast to the confident assurance by Chief Executive of Cocoa Board, Aboagye-Wiafe, that not even the coronavirus will affect the syndication loan. What this means is that Cocoa Board is expected to pay up for the club loan, reversing the downward trend in pricing it has enjoyed in previous years. Earlier, Head of Corporate Affairs at Cocoa Board, Fifi Boafo, disclosed to Joy Business that a peg of $1.3 billion for the syndication loan will remain as it is. Nothing will change, he said.
Obviously, this is the time we would expect that we have gone to do our roadshow, but because of COVID, like the president said, we are not in normal times. So the normal way of doing things has changed a little bit, but we are on course, and our expectation is that we will be able to raise the money needed for our operations next year. So yes, we are on course. The figure that was initially pegged has not changed. We are still working with the same figure. Of course, if it happens that based on our projections something would change, we shall communicate it. But as I speak to you today, that has not changed.
The coronavirus pandemic has had a dark turn on global cocoa value chains. Despite the obvious challenges, Ghana's cocoa regulator still insists days are bright for cocoa farmers.
The buyers, have closed their windows, so we are not doing buying. The price of cocoa had tumbled. It was going up. It was around $2,400, $2,500. Now it's gone down below $2,000. And that alone tells you immediately it brings to Ghana a deficit of almost about $1 billion. That alone. So if this thing should continue, even going to pay our farmers is going to be difficult because we are unable to syndicate right now.
Chief Executive of Cocoa Board, Aboagye-Wiafe, who earlier revealed in an interview with Joy Business that the coronavirus had caused Ghana's cocoa sector a loss of $1 billion, backtracked, explaining a risk assessment committee had rather been established to study price trends and propose strategies for a rebound.
We are making all efforts to get the money to pay our farmers. We've already set up a committee to look at the risk. They are doing what we call risk assessment of the whole situation. And we are being guided by the recommendations of this committee to ensure that our farmers are paid and their cocoa is bought.
Joy Business gathers that the next plan will be for the loan to be raised by a group of at least 13 banks, providing ticket sizes of approximately $75 million, although the actual size hasn't yet been decided.
Commissioner of Customs Division at the Ghana Revenue Authority, Keno Kojo-Damwa, retired, has told Joy Business that discussions are ongoing to assess the impact of the new integrated customs management system on high demurrage other countries' ports. This follows a series of protests from some port users over high cost of demurrage due to technical challenges faced with a new port clearing system. According to Keno Kojo-Damwa, if there is enough evidence that the delay in clearing of goods is due to the new system, importers will be given a waiver or refunded.
He said, and it's rightly so, we have engaged the shipping lines and owners. But we also need to tread cautiously and let our stakeholders know that it is when the demurrage is incurred in a manner that is attributable to the operation of the system, that the shipping lines may be willing to assist. And we also know that some of our people, for example, if you did not know about your queries, that's one thing. Now it's being put on your platform. Within a reasonable time, the expectation is that you deal with it. So if you don't deal with your query, and then you allow it to be in the system for a very long time, so in that case, it becomes your fault, not the fault of the system. So as much as possible, we are doing the sensitization, we are engaging our stakeholders to play their part very well. And when you play your part very well, and it is evident that the demurrage that is being incurred is as a result of one or two challenges that you encountered through no fault of yours, then certainly you are in a better position to be given the benefit of a refund, a waiver, whatever. So the engagement is ongoing, but we expect our partners, our cherished importers, declarants, shipping, freight forwarders, and all the people who matter in this business to play their part very well. And with that, we are sure that all these will be a thing of the past sooner than later.
Welcome back to the marketplace. Effective today, you will be required to pay the necessary charges and fees on mobile money interoperability as well as other digital banking payment. This was after a waiver on these transactions expired on June 20. Over the weekend. JoyNews has the details in the following report.
This should mean that from this morning, if you are moving funds from your mobile money to another network, all the necessary charges will be applied. Also, businesses and individuals that use the GIPS Instant Pay and the ACH Direct Credit would also be paying the required charges. These waivers were introduced in March this year as part of efforts to reduce the burden on businesses as a result of the COVID-19. It was also aimed at encouraging the use of more electronic platforms in the country. For now, we are not sure about how this could negatively impact on individuals and businesses in terms of the cost of using these platforms and whether it could also affect it going forward. For instance, when the Ghana Interbank Payment and Settlement Systems earlier moved to end this service, this didn't go down well with users of mobile money interoperability.
I think introducing charges will be a deterrent because around this time, people are not even making more income.
That the government took it off, I think it's helping. That is helping. So I think reintroducing it won't help.
Because sometimes the money you're having is not even enough for you to get some certainty. So I think they should hold on for a little while. Then we see how the economy goes. When we are stable with it, then you can bring back that.
But another question that will be lingering on the minds of consumers is that, will this also bring an end to other services the commercial bank had to waive in line with this move by the Ghana Interbank Payment and Settlement Systems? It would also be interesting to gauge the use of this platform when we resume the charges and how the consumers would also respond. Others have also argued that since we're still not out of this COVID-19 issues, it might not be fair to actually resume the charges on all these platforms and banking services.
On that note, I would like to say goodbye. On the marketplace, you can log on to myjoyonline.com/business for more business news updates. But I'm back at 5 p.m. with Business Live. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Sandra Esinam, and I've been doing this from home.